John Gilroy here. When you go to LinkedIn, everybody's a leader. Today, we get practical tips on leadership from Dr. Chase Cunningham with his new book, How Not to Lead. Hit the music, Manny.
Welcome to the Federal Tech Podcast, where industry leaders share insights on innovation with a focus on reducing cost and improving security for federal technology. If you like the Federal Tech Podcast, please support us by giving us a rating and review on Apple Podcast.
Welcome to the Federal Tech Podcast, the podcast that connects you to federal technology leaders. My name is John Gilroy, and I will be your moderator. Well, I start off these stupid podcasts with, for federal tech leaders, so I thought somewhere along the way, I have to talk about leadership. And so I dragged in Chase here to talk about, as a coincidence, he also has a book that he's releasing called How Not to Lead. Now, many of my listeners know Dr. Chase Cunningham as Dr. Zero Trust from the Dr. Zero Trust podcast. I know him from that. But other people know him in academia. He's got a PhD. People know him at the patent office. He's got like 5 or 6 patents. People know him over in the book at Amazon. They know him because he's got 5 or 6. He's got 7 books now, I think. So he's very knowledgeable, all kinds of experience, especially in the federal government. So, Chase, I'm going to ask you the Simon Sinek question. This is going to be an easy one. Why'd you write this book?
Yeah, well, good question. And I'm a fan of Simon Sinek, actually. I've read that book, I think, 2 or 3 times. For me, it was just because I deal with so many companies on the consulting side that are led by people that kind of just bumbled their way into leadership, to be perfectly frank. And I've definitely seen a lot of what not to do, how not to run a company, how not to execute. And I just happen to have, I guess you'd call it an insight from my military time as well. So I couldn't find a book that someone had written where it was basically what not to do. I found a million books on how to be amazing and how to walk over hot coals and grow your business to $1 billion and whatever. I didn't find the book about like how not to be a jackass and run a company.
And this is quite the book. I mean, it's almost like a novel. I mean, in this book, Chase talks about cattle. He talks about firefighting training. He talks about small boat maintenance. He talks about individuals that are not ethical. And we're not going to use any strong words here. This is like, and when I was reading this book, it was like I could take a scissors and I could probably get, 20 pages here, 20 pages, and they're almost like fiction. They're almost like, a novelist has written them. And so if you can read this for the novel, but the benefit really is from what not to make mistakes. I'm going in the classroom tonight. I'm going to sit down with a bunch of 30-year-olds and I'm going to say, read this book. It's got nothing to do with technology. Read this book if you want to sell pizzas in Chicago, because so many practical tips, aren't there, Chase?
Yeah, I mean, I pride myself just on a daily basis, right, of trying to make things as honest and real as I can with people. And for me, being able to tie in real experience, like growing up on a farm, I learned a hell of a lot about what not to do. Being in the military, I learned a lot about what not to do if you want to live. And then, being in business, I've definitely been around a bunch of folks that showed me the wrong way to do things. So I just thought it was super important to get the point across of there are better ways to do things, and it's valuable to understand the wrong way before you do it, not after. We want to solve the problem before it's a problem.
Well, I have unusual topics, and today's topic is going to be 18th century French playwrights. And the guy I'm talking about is a guy named Molière, and he wrote a book, not a book, a play called Tartuffe. And he famously said, some people are born great, some people achieve greatness, and some people have greatness thrust upon them. It's been my experience that some people get leadership thrust upon them. Oh, there's Chase. He's the tallest guy here. Well, you lead him out of here. I mean, this is what happens. And so that's a question that I was thinking about. Well, what happens if you didn't go to the military academy? You just get thrust upon you. So I think so what do you think about that? I mean, that happens to people, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, in cyber, it's actually kind of, in technology too, it's especially unique because you have a lot of people that will create a product or an app or a program or something. And for some sort of weird circuitous route, they wind up being the CEO of the company. And I would say, in my experience, 95% of the time, they should not be the CEO. But because of investors and a whole bunch of other reasons, it happens. And it's painful, honestly, to sit there and watch those people who don't want to be doing that work trying to be a CEO or something. So there's also a really good point to take away from one of the chapters of the book of it's okay to decide not to be that person. You're not you're not losing if you're a technologist and you just want to be a technologist. Like, don't think you have to also be the CEO. There's people that are skilled for that. Let them do it.
I do so many interviews about technology. I have a mandate from the White House, an executive order just for John Gilroy, that I have to say artificial intelligence every 20 seconds. So I have to say artificial intelligence, so it's mandatory. Now, in your book, you talk about a dictum by some military folks. I think Navy SEALs, they talk about, in order to go fast, you got to go slow. And I think this is advice for people jumping into artificial intelligence. They just throw everything in there, take all their Chase Cunningham Incorporated, put all your financial records up on artificial intelligence. What could possibly go wrong? So go slow,
Yeah.
go fast. Good advice.
Yeah, I mean, if you ever talk with special operations guys, they always talk about planning from the success backwards, and they also talk about slow is smooth and smooth is fast. And what they really mean is, if you take your time and understand the outcome you're looking for and work your way backwards from that, you will figure out what will likely go wrong, and then you work your way to solve that problem before it occurs. I think the reference, the Bin Laden raid, is a great thing. They literally planned to have a helicopter crash during that op. And when it did crash, it was no big deal. They knew exactly what to do. They just kept on moving, kept on going, and they did the mission. So that is something that in business we don't think about. Usually we're focused on, how do I get to the next objective? What's next quarter look like, et cetera. Whereas my point was, think about it from the end state backwards, and then understand, if I go slowly, I can get it right and not spend my time solving problems that I shouldn't have created in the first place.
So I read your book, and you talked about dumpster chickens. This is an unusual topic, I have to admit. And so I kind of filed away in the back of my little mind all 3 brain cells. I was swimming laps one day, and I was thinking about one time my wife and I were in California, went down to Monterey and kind of walked around the water there, and saw these, I guess they're dumpster chickens. So,
Yep.
So what did a dumpster chicken got to do with leading in the federal technology world?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I don't know if everybody else listens to this, that drives me nuts is when someone comes in and they squawk like a dumpster chicken would, and then they usually will crap all over things, and then they fly away, and you're sitting there going, that was totally not helpful. All you've done is create more problems. If you're not going to come with a solution, then you're literally actually making things worse. So, in the Navy, we had the dumpster at the end of the pier all the time, and you had to fight the dumpster chickens to literally get rid of the trash. So it's one of these things of, it happens and it shouldn't, and people should be aware that that's an ineffective leadership technique and strategy. Don't be a dumpster chicken.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, there's just so many vignettes in here. You can go back and reread these chapters and go back and forth, and the chapters of Chase on horseback when he was a young man, and failure and getting up again, and all. I mean, these lessons that they seem pretty, but they're very, very important lessons. I mean, I've had my share of failure, and I've learned a lot of things too. And one thing too, I think it's important, is that when I start off in life, I learned lessons on an iron ore dock. I worked in an iron ore dock for 4 years, and some of the guys, you look at them and you may look down on them because they're maybe missing teeth and rough edges, but they can really give you so much good advice. And I think that's another thing about this, is don't ever look down on anybody. I mean, all kinds of people can give really important advice for you. And there may be the person in the back of the room who doesn't tell bad jokes and talk, but it's the smartest one in the room. And so, that's a lesson I learned from this book too, is that, boy, don't ever look down on anyone, and always keep your head up and look for information from everybody, because, wow, it's just, there's so many people surprise you.
Yeah, I mean, we've got the whole bunch of stuff around diversity and equity and inclusion, which is absolutely necessary. And really, I think what gets lost in that too, though, is a lot of times you will discount people because they are not the folks at the board table, right? They're not a C something. And really, the people that I want to talk to, the people that I know will tell me where the bodies are buried and where we should avoid. Those are the folks that sit on the edge of the room, that listen, that will chime in very rarely, but you know that they've got something lying in their brain that is ready to solve a problem. They've got the scars, and those scars are there for a very good reason.
So, Chase, you read this book, and if I had a highlighter and I wrote, every time there's a reference to horse, I'd run out of ink. And so you got race horses, you got cattle horses, you got plow horses.
Yep.
So my question to you is what kind of horse are you, Chase?
I probably would say a big draft horse that's really just kind of plods along and will pull pretty
Huh.
hard. Not
Oh,
very fast. Yeah, eats a lot, that type of thing.
be like a Clydesdale. That's you're
Yeah,
getting the traits at least,
Clydesdale,
so,
right? Or what's the Irish draft horse? Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, something like that. Good, good. Well, I mentioned going to the classroom. I'll go in the classroom tonight. My students love to hear about starting up companies. They all dream of starting up a company. It's Chase Cunningham software and make $1 million and buy an island in the Caribbean or something. And I always try to say, well, that's a great idea. And boy, I hope you do. And I hope you make $1 million tomorrow. But it's difficult. And they just figured they'd get an investor and it'd be great. And so I bring in investors and I say, these are sharks. You got a shark in the room here. And so I think a lot of advice in here has got to do with leadership, but I think in leading small company and startups, because I think you're as wary as I am about investors. And you make some very practical tips in this book, don't you?
Yeah, it's interesting because I do so much consulting and advisory with small companies like you're talking about. A lot of the folks that are just coming out of college that have really great ideas and are doing cool things. And the thing that they're running to is, well, we got to go raise money. And I'm always sitting there going, are you sure that you want to go off and do that? Because you need to understand, you like what's the show, Shark Tank? Like you are jumping into the Shark Tank and you are the goldfish. So know that that's the thing. And there is a value to be able to eat what you kill. Like I am personally a fan of that model. If you can generate, your ARR based on the customers and not run to go raise money from the Silicon Valley people, I think you can actually have a longer term business success than if you're just trying to raise money. And the other point that I made in that chapter was it's all typically a downward slide. Once you start raising money, you're going to have to raise more money. Matter of fact, I had a CEO I was talking with recently who was a CEO that had raised money, and he's literally told me, he's like, my job is to raise money. And I was going, I think your job is to grow the company. But for him, because he was on that downward slide, he was like, all I can do and all I need to do for the business is raise money, which is kind of sad when you actually think about it.
I did an event in November at Top Golf, and you've probably been there.
Love it. Yeah, love it.
And I invited 20 CEOs of satellite and space companies. And so I was talking to one of these gentlemen, you probably know him, and he said, how do you pick the guests? I said, well, we have a no jerk rule. If someone's on my podcast and they're a jerk, don't invite them. If they get along and bring value, then we invite them to the event. And so that is paralleled in your book, because I think a chapter there, and this is a very highly intellectual and sophisticated title, where it says, "Beware the brilliant jerk."
Yeah. Yeah, we've run across that. I mean, right? You have a lot of people that you run into in technology that will they're not good at managing their emotions. They're not very stoic. They get pissed off pretty easy. And it's I think the reference, be a duck, right? You can be as calm and cool on top of the water, underneath the water, churn your feet and do whatever you want, but don't let it out in front of other folks, because it just winds up, especially in technology. I mean, this is a fishbowl and people will figure that out really, really quickly. And no one's scared of you. I mean, that's, you can be that mean person, but no one is afraid. And that's not what you want. I don't want people I work with to be concerned about whether or not I'm going to fly off the hook.
Well, Pennsylvania is not too far from here. There's a lot of mushroom farms in Pennsylvania. I think they're in caves or something.
Yeah.
And there's another reference in here. Maybe you spent too many years in the farm there, Chase. But talk about mushroom farmers. So,
Yeah.
So here's another bit of advice: don't be a mushroom farmer.
Yeah, mushroom farmers. Everybody's been in that spot where the leadership comes in and they say, we've got things going on, and you're kind of going, well, okay, would you tell me what that is? So my point on mushroom farming is don't keep people in the dark and feed them manure and expect good things to happen. You want to make sure that they understand what's going on, give them what they need to thrive and grow, and then good things will happen to you. No one wants to be a mushroom that is being farmed. And what's funny too is I didn't know this, but I learned it about mushrooms for the research for the book. There's actually like a substrata that mushrooms communicate on, which we call gossip. So if you're, if you're mushroom farming, expect gossip to take off.
Yeah, makes sense. All kinds of practical advice. Earlier in the show, you mentioned different type of leadership techniques. I've met a few leaders in my day. I think one of the best leaders I ever met was retired Brigadier General Greg Toohill.
Absolutely.
And I mean, this guy, he's been some places, done some things, but, he doesn't lose perspective. He really doesn't, One day I was driving around with him. We're going to data centers in Ashburn, and he talked about his wife. His wife said, I don't care if you're a brigadier general. take out the garbage. And it's very practical. And he knows what the perspective is. In certain situations, he is the big dog. In other situations, he's just a equal partner in a marriage. And so I think, just because someone has an original idea or something clever, they may think that they're a step above. Well, they may be a step above someone technically. But what about financially? They can get their clock clean. I mean, you've seen it. I've seen it. I mean, naive. They're not naive. They're real smart. Oh yeah, I've seen smart. I see a lot of smart. I think smart's overrated. And so this perspective is important. You write about it, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, I think I can't remember who exactly said it, but it's always good to be the dumbest person in the room. And I mean that really is what you want. If you're in a leadership position, in my experience, you want to be the person that doesn't think they know everything, and you're willing to accept insights and whatnot. And that was why when I wrote my acknowledgments, I made sure to point out the people that I've run into that is how they operate, because I think a lot of times those people don't get credit. They're in charge, they're running things, and they just make things happen. But if you really talk to them, most of the time they realize that they need help and they need to understand more from someone else. And that's what makes them so great.
A few years back, I was doing a podcast with my students, and I met you there, and I met Danny. When I met Danny, not in good shape. He was kind of financially hurting. He had a wife and 2 kids. He was maybe on thin ice. And I met him, and I kept touch with him. A few years later, he broke through. Yeah. And so I think if you're listening to this interview and you go out and buy the book of how not to lead, maybe you should write the second sequel is how to lead. And Danny is an example with Threat Locker down in Florida. So maybe give us some hope. Maybe people can figure it out. Maybe they can avoid the mushrooms and the dumpster chickens and all that, and thinking you're too highfalutin. So just give us a quick story about Danny, and maybe he summarized his story in the back, but it is an amazing story.
Yeah, I mean, Danny's one of my great friends, and he's done something where everyone that I ran into when I was working with him, they told him he was doing the wrong things. They were like, "Don't run your company this way. Your wife can't be your COO. Don't bring your brother in." Danny literally was just going, "I don't care what you say. I know that this is the way it's going to work." And he hustled harder than any 5 guys I've ever met. And Danny did it. Like, Danny's off to the races. He's doing amazing things. I also wrote about the folks at Lumu there, which don't fit the typical VC-backed Silicon Valley company. They're off crushing it too. And it's a testament to the folks that are running the organizations that are actually committed to what they're doing, that they see a way to do it and do it slightly differently than the model says has to happen. And when you do that, when you break the mold and you do it correctly, you lift others up. And as you lift others up, you get the force of an army behind you. And then really good things happen. And that's where Danny and the folks at Lumu and some of these other people are seeing that success. They don't fit the mold, and they've figured a way to take the mold and drag it with them.
And I hope if someone is listening to this and they don't come from the fancy background, you can do it. I mean, look at Danny. I mean, he comes from a very humble background, and he just figured things out. So you don't have to have your daddy paying your way through Harvard, and you go to Stanford and you get venture capital, and maybe you get things out of perspective. It dawned on me. Maybe that's how I get things out. Maybe it's good to come from a humble background like Chase did, and I did, and Danny did, and then you see things and you appreciate some things that maybe I know some people from some fancy backgrounds, and they do tend to maybe think a little bit much of themselves. Yeah. How's that for a discreet?
Yeah, I always have to remind myself, because I do work in tech and business and whatever else, that like the chip that I have on my shoulder is something I make sure that I recognize. Like when I get around people that have come from those kind of stellar backgrounds, the money folks I call them, I always make it a point to sort of dial it back, because immediately my knee-jerk reaction is I don't like this person, and that's the wrong way to be. It's not fair. But it just is kind of built in. You know what I mean? I came from horses and barbed wire and that type of stuff.
Yeah. Well, I came from a step below that. I came from working on the iron ore dock in Cleveland, a place called Whiskey Island. So We looked up to the people who were cowboys. That was great. So Amazon, when is your book going to be available?
So it's available for Kindle right now. Amazon, it'll be out for hardback on the 24th, and I am currently working on a Audible version where I'm reading it. So that's on the list probably in the next couple months.
Oh, I think that's a great way to consume something when you're working in the yard. If you're at the gym, especially if you're doing some cardio, 2 hours, whatever you happen to do for cardio, it's a good way to listen to it. Great.
Yeah.
And so you go to Amazon.com. And the name of the book again, let's hear that book from you, Chase.
Yeah, How Not to Lead, Lessons Every Manager Can Learn from Dumpster Chickens, Mushroom Farmers, and Other Office Offenders.
Your publisher accepted that title. Is that right?
Yeah, I totally was shocked when they said, "Oh, great, that's," and they totally ran with it. I was pretty shocked.
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, I think I may pull back on that title, but dumpster chicken makes sense. If you think about it, it makes sense if you've been around the water and the docks. What's going on.
Yeah. Nobody's got and I actually have a dumpster chicken on the cover, so
it's good to know. And so this is a podcast. If you want to listen, can you suggest a podcast for my listeners to maybe start dialing into? What do you recommend there, Chase?
I would say if you're available, there's a guy that has a great podcast called the Dr. Zero Trust Show, and I try and cover all things cyber and zero trust, and I try and keep it weekly. So sometimes it doesn't happen, but I appreciate the shout out, and I also would like to thank John, because John has been somebody that I've listened to and learned a lot from. So appreciate all your insight over the years.
So Dr. Zero Trust podcast, and a lot of people watch and listen on LinkedIn. I listen when I'm outside doing work in the yard. And so a lot of practical tips there. And there's no fluff in this podcast. And there's some strong language, but there's not any, hi, this is Chase. I like raisins. I had, coffee this morning. And I put no, it's just is standing there and punch, and then you're done. You move on. So I think the best part about that. And I listen to so many podcasts where they get on and go, yeah, this is Chase, and I got on blue shirt today, and it's raining outside, and my dog Fluffy got to go to the dog. So, no fluffy dogs on that podcast.
No. Sometimes they bark, though, my little fluffy dogs. So.
Oh, I know them. I know the names, too. Okay, buy the book. Here we go. You have been listening to the Federal Tech Podcast with John Gilroy. I'd like to thank my guest, Chase Cunningham, who is the author of a new bestseller called How Not to Lead. Thanks, Chase.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Federal Tech Podcast. If you like the Federal Tech Podcast, please support us by giving us a rating and review on Apple Podcast.